Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of the Orchestration Kitchen. Today, we'll be talking about leaving SiteMinder for a more modern IDP. And on today's journey, you'll be joined by myself, Mark Callahan, from the product marketing team at Strata, and Terry Kozard, Chef Kozard from our solutions engineering team at Strata as well. So today, as we look at SiteMinder and the audience that's joining us, you're all very familiar with SiteMinder being just it was a very good, solid legacy IDP for a legacy IDP environment. Terry, as we think about some of the reasons why SiteMinder was so prevalent and so well used and so sticky, when we look back to on-prem applications and on-prem compute, it just was a solid option. And what we're finding, though, is as people are migrating their compute to the cloud, they're looking for those more modern IDPs. So from the audience's perspective, as we think about what we'll be discussing today, what are some of the reasons why SiteMinder has been so sticky?
Well, first and foremost, when SiteMinder first came out, it was light years ahead of its competition. It really did just an effective job, and it was the standard bearer for the longest of times. But as with every bit of technology, newer technologies come out that sometimes are more advantageous for different companies, and things like cloud hosting providers, Azure, Okta, those types of identity platforms tend to be a little more agile and forward-leaning. So although SiteMinder was really prevalent and still is in many organizations, it's not uncommon that we hear people wanting to move to something a little more modern.
Gotcha. Well, let's take a look at what we're going to discuss today in today's kitchen. So as we do on each of these episodes, we start off with just a quick snapshot of what identity orchestration is to help set the stage so that everyone has a common baseline for the conversation today. We'll then jump into a recipe whiteboard where we'll actually go through, thanks to Terry driving us here, an actual visual description of how the recipe plays out. Then we're actually going to cook with the recipe live. It's never good enough just to show all the ingredients and say, hey, we smushed these things together and made a wonderful muffin. We're actually going to cook that muffin with you live. And then we'll have this open for Q&A throughout. So please feel free to use the question button if you have any questions as we go along today. And again, with the audience that's joining us, we're assuming that most of y'all are very familiar with SiteMinder. In fact, you're probably a SiteMinder customer today. You may be looking to do an entire migration off of SiteMinder, or we hear this quite often, I think, Terry, as a lot of our customers end up maintaining SiteMinder for just a small subset of their applications, those non-standard apps, even though they've already migrated everything else to Okta or to an Azure environment, they still maintain it. So as we think about how identity orchestration can help people to leave SiteMinder for good, what is identity orchestration?
Great question, Mark, and thank you for asking. And thank you for all our participants. We look forward to your great questions. So really the idea of identity orchestration is it's a new category of technology that allows you to protect any application, particularly those legacy ones that are still protected by SiteMinder today in favor of modern things. So what we do here is we have the ability to abstract out all of the common identity services that you could use for an identity ecosystem. Think of authentication. I don't want to use SiteMinder for authentication. I want to use Azure. That's what I'll be showing you in our recipe here in a little bit. But it doesn't just stop there. It could be going to modern access controls, conditional access policies, things like that, enforcing MFA in a way that's not available or easy to do in SiteMinder today. But then we can go grab information, contextual information from you, about you from anywhere. And then we can do advanced things, go to risk engines, authorization engines, and modernize it across all of the entire identity related spectrum for it. But really the secret and the keys to the kingdom of why we're unique and different is that we do the last mile integration. Down in the lower right of this diagram where we're showing that the applications in the lower right all expect some kind of a token to let it know that it's got an authenticated authorized user. Well, great. We allow you through orchestration to create that token. So the application in many cases doesn't even know the world around it changed. It doesn't know SiteMinder went away. We maintain single sign-on across your environment. So during that interim time where SiteMinder still exists and hasn't been fully deprecated yet. We make sure that you don't have to have repeated logins and things like that. So it really is designed to make that a smooth and seamless transition for your users as you look to fully modernize in favor of whatever your technology choice is.
That's great. And actually, that's one of the things that we maybe kind of buried the lead a little bit in all this, is that we talked about how to leave SiteMinder for good without refactoring the applications. You just talked about the fact that these apps, as we see in the bottom right of the screen, they don't know that the world has changed. They're still thinking that the information that they're getting is actually coming from SiteMinder, even though you may have already long since retired it. You didn't have to change anything in those applications.
That's exactly right. And that's really the beauty of the platform that we've built and how we've created a new category, is that identity orchestration doesn't behave like any identity related technology that really anybody's ever been familiar with. It behaves very different. It creates this fabric that allows you to be very flexible and agile as you go through the entire process.
Gotcha. Well, and one of the other reasons that SiteMinder is seen as so sticky, or a lot of organizations think there's no way that they can get off of it, is how customizable it was. In terms of creating very complex policies and rules set up that were, the accretion of, a decade of different policies that they've added to it. They look at this and they almost think, oh my gosh, there's no way I could ever fully get rid of SiteMinder because it's just too complex of an environment that I've put together, because it was so customizable. So how would Mavericks fit into a traditional SiteMinder architecture? How would those two play together?
Well, fantastic. Let me actually show you exactly how we turn off SiteMinder in favor of Mavericks, and we'll go through exactly that.
Okay.
So this typifies a very common, very almost ubiquitous pattern within SiteMinder and the other platforms that are like it, where you have a policy server that's central to the organization. It's stood up, that makes all the decisions. And then on the web application itself, on the web server, that's often IaaS, sometimes Apache, maybe Nginx, different types of things. There's an agent typically that sits there. What happens when a user tries to go to the agent? It calls to the policy server and says, gosh, can I get into the application and things like that? And that's just how the architecture was built, and it works fine, but tends to be a little higher maintenance in terms of working there. So in order to modernize this very application, what we do is the first step is to install an orchestrator. An orchestrator installation takes a few seconds if you don't have it automated. It's a single command. There's no database, there's no directory. It's incredibly lightweight, and you can actually get it fully installed in seconds. Step two is to replicate the policy. We'll understand either programmatically or just looking at the policy server to see, how is this application protected today? What are the policies that are being enacted? Where does it authenticate? Where do I get information about the user so I can give it to the application? We replicate all those exact steps there. It doesn't take long. And then lastly, we're showing this that we're actually moving the application. You can leave it where it is, or you can choose to migrate it to a cloud hosting provider or wherever you think is best for your organization. But conceptually, what we're trying to show here in step three is you're removing the control of that application to an identity fabric using Mavericks. Now, Mavericks is built to be modern in everything that it does. So we now can have direct point-and-click integrations with modern things: Azure, local directories, risk engines, identity proofing, whatever it is that you might need. We can directly integrate with them however you need or want into the fabric, so the application doesn't have to be changed. And then the secret sauce, this is really what makes us unique, is that regardless of the application that we're talking about, we then transform it into the token that it expects. In the earlier conversation, or the earlier setup, I talked about every application expects to know that it's got an authenticated authorized user through a token. It could be a header, could be cookies, could be claims, could be all kinds of things. We know how to speak all of those things. So we do the last mile integration just at the sub-second that it's needed, so that the application knows exactly who's coming in and that they're authorized to do so. And then we keep you future-proofed at that point. The orchestration, again, is designed to be modern in everything that it does, so that we can then do that next thing. That thing, if you want to look at an upcoming standard like continuous access evaluation, passkeys, WebAuthn, whatever it is that's important to you as an organization, we natively understand it.
And you've done that, again, without having to change the app, right? Like what we've done here is it's modernized once and forever almost, or once and for good. That by doing this, it's then ready to accept these other identity services without having to refactor the application whatsoever.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's intended to be very simple. And the beauty of it is the application doesn't know the world around it changed. It just continues to hum on as it always has.
Love it. Well, so as we think about some of the reasons that SiteMinder having really complex rules and pulling information from different places, as we think about the LDAP store, maybe they have information that's coming from different user stores or things like that. How might you replicate and be able to pull that information from other places to create parity with that existing policy that somebody had for that app in SiteMinder?
Great question. Let me actually just show you what that looks like live here. We'll go to our whiteboard and then we'll show you exactly that. So here is the end result. This is a fully migrated application where we understand that the orchestration layer is now protecting it. In order to accomplish that, although we have 8 different kind of conceptual things being called out here, in reality, it takes 3 easy steps. Let me walk you through what that looks like. The first thing is sign up for our free trial, mavericks.strata.io. And the first step when you're trying to integrate an application like this is to add the fabric elements. We think of identity fabrics as those deeper integrations where we learn about a user, where we authenticate a user, where there's deeper, richer integration patterns that we need. So in this case, we're going to make an integration with Azure, and then we're going to create an integration with LDAP. These things are just trivially done. It's just a metadata exchange for things like Azure. And then for LDAP, tell us where the LDAP is and give us the credentials that we need to use to make the query. It's that simple. Step 2 is this is where we actually start modeling the application itself. Once I've got the fabric elements declared in my environment, now I have the opportunity to start learning about the applications. We can protect any web application in one way, shape, or form. In this case, we're talking about legacy patterns for those things that are still hanging around in SiteMinder. So the next thing we do is, again, in Mavericks Cloud UI, you just go ahead and define what the application looks like. You tell us how does it need to understand that it's got an authenticated, authorized user, and then you're off to the races. It takes a minute or 2. And then the final step is stitching them all together in a user flow. Make it easy so that you can determine how you authenticate in order to get there. Under what conditions can you get to this page or that page? Where do I go get information? And then how do I craft that token, headers in this case, into the application so it natively expects it? All of this happens really, really, really quickly.
So you showed us the before. We've seen a little bit of the after here. Part of the before that also makes it complex is that to maintain that legacy SiteMinder environment, there's a human element to this as well. There's something, I've been waiting to use this joke at all these sessions. There's almost too many cooks in the kitchen, if you will, in that, we talk to our customers and we hear that there's 5, 6, 7, 9 different administrators still required to keep that SiteMinder environment running because of all the different elements that are there. How many people did it take to do this?
That's a great question, Mark. And it's not uncommon that we see a big tribe of people who are supporting legacy applications because they're big. There's directories, there's application servers, there's all kinds of things that are just needed for the care and feeding of the environment. Mavericks is the exact opposite of that. We're kind of the anti-pattern to those legacy infrastructures. We're distributed by nature, and we can do these things quickly and easily. So what we're seeing for our customers who moved away from SiteMinders of the world, they may have started with 9, and now they're doing it with a quarter of a person to keep the environment up and running. It's designed to be very resilient, highly performant, and low latency, but it doesn't take a lot of care and feeding. In fact, once you have the orchestrator installed, which takes seconds, and you keep it up and running, all of the configuration can be done by oftentimes an analyst. You don't need a developer. You don't need really deep, richly steep, expensive resources for it in many cases.
That's great. Well, you've got so we've taken out sort of that human weight of the tech debt that came with SiteMinder. We've gotten rid of some of the technical complexity in terms of the hardware and the systems and the servers that are required to keep SiteMinder running. In fact, we've also done away potentially now with your SiteMinder license altogether. And so all of those resources can be used to think about innovation, to put those towards competitive differentiation, think about where else they might be used in the organization. And as you said, with a quarter of a person compared to 6, 7, 9 people prior, that's impressive. That's really cooking with the gas there. So we've seen all this. How about we jump into the actual kitchen itself and start doing this live?
Love it. Let's do that. So here, this is actually the Mavericks Cloud user interface. This is where we drive all of the configuration changes. And I'm going to show you all the steps that I just highlighted in our whiteboarding session. So right here, we've just got a dashboard representing all of the things that are built into my particular tenant. Yours will look different. But the first step, as I'd mentioned, is creating the identity fabric. The identity fabric are those deeper, richer integration things. So in my demonstration, what I'll show you live here in a moment, we're actually going to use a SAML integration to Azure. We could have used an OIDC. I use SAML. So in this case, it's just a metadata exchange. All of this information is very familiar to anybody who's worked with Azure AD before, or Okta, or any of the modern identity providers. It really gives the information to Azure to know to trust us, and vice versa, so that we know that the fabric trusts Azure to do the authentication, conditional access, maybe MFA, depending on what you're looking to do. And then vice versa, Azure trusts the fabric as a constituent in that. So that's the first integration, very simply done. Second one that we're going to pick on today is the LDAP. Sometimes we want to get additional information that doesn't natively exist in Azure. And historically, you would have to synchronize it up into the Cloud Directory in order to have Azure AD give it back to somebody in claims. We don't need to worry about that. If the data naturally wants to reside in your HR system or a directory that's on premise or wherever you need it to be, just point us to it. We do everything at the sub-second that it's needed. We do everything at runtime. But the integration to the LDAP, as you previously asked about, is just, where do I find the LDAP server? How do I know where to look for users? And how do I prove to the LDAP server that I'm an authorized requester for this information? Again, very, very simple.
And so what we did there is we talked about the complexity of a previous SiteMinder policy. Sometimes they look at, customers will look at, hey, I'm moving to Azure AD, and they're trying to figure out how to replicate that into Azure. And they're like, oh my gosh, can Azure actually support all of these different complex rules that I've set up? What we're showing is we may not have to overload Azure itself as well. We could actually handle some of those at the Mavericks level here.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the Mavericks fabric is intended to be flexible for whatever your needs are. And the beauty of it is that you now can do things that previously were hard to do. So the things that are typical of a federated application where the identity provider and the application are tightly coupled to themselves, you don't have to worry about those in a fabric-based model. We can go get information. We can go externally to look for policies. We can go to an axiomatics, a threat matrix. We can go to all those things to make robust policy decisions in ways that just exceed even the modern platforms.
So cool. And so we're back to the identity fabric. The identity fabric is uniquely yours. It belongs to you as an organization. It's something you create through the process that you just showed. So we've done the IDP, we've done LDAP. What's next in the process here?
Next process is, now that we've got the fabric elements defined, now we start learning about the applications. Now this is really quick. You can invite your application owners to do this, or if you have an identity team that does it, whoever knows the information. It doesn't really matter from our perspective. They just come to our Cloud UI. In the application that I'm going to be demonstrating for you here is called Sonar. It's a header-based application. This is very common for the SiteMinder-based patterns. And the only information we really need, where's the application that I care about? If you want to do finer-grained authorization checks to do policy decisions based on going to this page versus that page, you just define what are the resources that I want to have policy driven against. And then if you have unauthorized or error pages, just for user-friendly experience. But that's it. That's all you really need to know for this type of an application. So then, step 3, this is where the fun starts. This is where you actually stitch together the identity fabric elements and apply them to the applications that are important to you. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our deprecation pattern here. Here, we define which applications apply to this user flow. You could have multiples. I'm picking on Sonar individually. I'm going to say my authentication provider is going to be Azure because that's how we created the identity fabric. I'm then going to go get the additional information, or potentially get information from a local directory. Could be an external or cloud-hosted one just as easily. For those pages where I want individual policies to apply, now I get to model that. So here we're saying if you're coming into the root of the application, as long as you're authenticated, we're going to let you in. But if you want to go to the calendar app page, then you have to be a member of the accounting department. We'll go in runtime to the LDAP directory, and we're going to say what department is the user in, and we'll enforce that policy there. And then at the last bit of it is that this application expects to consume headers. That's typical for the legacy SiteMinder-based applications. So now it's simply a matter of telling us what is the name of the header that it expects, where do I find that header, and what's the attribute that I get back in the form of a claim, or what's the attribute that I get from LDAP. It doesn't matter at all from for what this is. You can add as many as you want. You can modify them whenever you need or want. It's point and click. So if you have the integrations with the Identity Fabric already available to you, and then you model the application, you can quite literally protect an application like this in minutes. So why don't I show you how all of this works today? So in many of the audience's experience, they likely have a user experience that looks like this, at least for some of their applications.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of head nodding. I'm with you here. Yep, we're very familiar with this.
And it's fine. It did what it did very well, but modern technology has advanced pretty far forward that usernames and passwords aren't always the best modeling way to find out who you are. So let's see what it might look like through our modeled application. So here I'm going to actually go through an application like I've been telling you about, but by policy, the Fabric says, I don't know who this is. I'm going to redirect that user to Azure for authentication. Could be anywhere. We're picking on Azure today. And here we let Azure do what Azure does very, very well. And typical of single sign-on demonstrations, it goes very quickly and it moves, and it's not terribly visually impactful. But the important thing to remember here is that the application doesn't know SiteMinder isn't there anymore. So here, all of the things that the application expected and got from SiteMinder throughout its life now are being fully replicated based on the policies we set up earlier in the Fabric. So here, all of the personalization information we got from Mavericks. But Mavericks got it from a combination of things that we learned from Azure in the form of claims and things that we got elsewhere. So here we've got the first name and the last name from Azure because it always has those kinds of things. But the job title that in our organization isn't in Azure. And again, we didn't want to synchronize it up there and bloat Azure AD. We just said it naturally wants to be in the directory. So we went ahead and got it there. We then did finer grained authorization checks. So as we click into this, the Fabric goes and says, are they in the right department? Are they in accounting? And then we do the same thing for the various based applications based on what you need or want. The important thing to also see with this application is we're just echoing back the headers. So here we can see exactly what gets passed to the application so that it understands that it's got an authenticated authorized user. All of this was done and executed and deployed in minutes, not months. And so we really do have a very agile, flexible, and powerful platform for which you can use to fully deprecate this.
Terry, this is probably a good place to ask a question. Actually, we have from Bradley that was asking about SiteMinder session, SM session cookie. So the things you're talking about here, there's user data that you're talking about sourcing it from other places. Do we use that cookie as well, the SM session cookie?
We don't. Great question, and thank you for that. That's a common question we get from SiteMinder customers. So the way that SiteMinder works is that the agent, if you recall, and the policy server, they have to trust each other. And so they built a very robust way in which to do that securely. And they have encrypted cookies, the SM session cookie, as you mentioned, that lets the policy server know that the agent's authorized and those types of things. Since we're replacing that agent, the agent just doesn't exist anymore. There's really no need for the SM session cookie. In fact, the only value the SM session cookie has is to communicate between SiteMinder components. And the goal here is to turn off SiteMinder. So yeah, we wouldn't need it anymore, but we get all of the goodness that it helped you derive in SiteMinder.
Got it. I mean, you're right. Like the application really is none the wiser that the world has changed around it. And that's fine. You've long since retired SiteMinder, and yet it continues to function as if SiteMinder was protecting it. No refactoring needed.
Exactly right. And the other benefit there is that you maintain a single sign-on experience across that during the coexistence time period. Is
Good
that
point.
here I'm showing it with a single application because it makes for a quicker demonstration. But in real world environments, it's really sensitive that if they want to use Azure to authenticate, they don't want to have to re-authenticate for those applications that are still hanging on in SiteMinder. We can do that as well.
Exactly. No, that makes great sense because that consistent user experience. Great. You've migrated 80% of your apps over to Azure AD, or I'm sorry, Microsoft Entra ID, which they've changed the name to. So you've migrated 80% of them over there. But then you have this other 20% of core applications that they still have to use a different pattern to log into. What you've just shown is that now it's through a single consistent SSO experience through Microsoft Entra ID.
That's exactly correct.
So cool. And so as we think about the scale of this, we've talked about a handful of apps, here and there, as people are looking at this. So Ben was curious about, is this possible to do with hundreds of apps? I mean, we talked about how easy it was, minutes, seconds. We proved minutes and seconds here. What happens if you have hundreds of apps, not just those 20% of apps, 10, 20, 40 apps left? What if you have 400, 800 apps?
Absolutely. No, that's a great question. And that's a very common circumstance where people they've invested so heavily over the years and decade of using SiteMinder that it's the keys to the kingdom. How do I get off there quickly for whatever reason that you may need to? We're designed to do this at scale. We actually have our customers, many of them start with this exact pattern. They want to deprecate SiteMinder in favor of whatever comes next. And we can actually do these in bulk, in mass. And so we've got a customer just signed up for us, and they're going, as their first iteration into that, they're going to do 70 in a month. They'll then, once they're going to learn their lessons, and we can actually get more automated in the entire process. So generally the guidance that we give to people is that the speed with which you want to consume this change is really largely going to be governed by you, not us, because the platform is designed to do this in tremendous scale. It really just becomes a question of how much change do you want to be able to bring into the organization at any given time. And so what we've seen pretty consistently is that we can move much, much, much faster than our customers are comfortable moving, just because we've created this very elegant and agile platform.
That's terrific. Well, and speaking of questions, I have one more for you, Terry, and this one's from Brian. He was saying that SiteMinder protects both modern and legacy applications. Can you help with all applications? You and I only talked about these legacy header-based apps because that's typically what you see. What about the modern ones that somebody may have protected with SiteMinder?
Fantastic question, and thank you. Yeah, we simply can. What we've talked about a lot today is how to do it with a legacy pattern in SiteMinder. But if your applications are modern and you want to do more advanced things than your IDP has, like data resiliency, for example, what happens if your cloud service provider goes offline? What happens if your internet connection gets severed? We can help with all of those things, even for modern-based applications based on the fabric we built. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Love it. Well, speaking of loving to talk to you, our time is up today, but this has been phenomenal. We today went from start to finish talking about how to leave SiteMinder for good, and we showed that it didn't have to be through months and pain and tears of rewriting an application. You did this in just a few minutes, literally, and we could do that with hundreds at scale, as you talked about as well. So we invite you, our audience, to join us for the next episode of the Orchestration Kitchen. You can see the link to the hub here for the next session, which we'll have in 2 weeks. As people are curious about, we make it seem very easy. And that's the hardest part about identity demos, is oftentimes when you don't see anything, you're like, ta-da, that was the magic. A lot of people would like to try this themselves or hear more about how does this relate to my unique SiteMinder deployment? What can they do, Terry?
Great question. It does look easy. And really, to be transparent, there's nothing easy about this. We've just made it as simple as we reasonably could. And I think we've done a really credible job about that. But my challenge to all of you is don't take my word for it. Go show yourself. The easiest ways to start doing that is just go to mavericks.strata.io and sign up for a trial. It's free. You can download an orchestrator. You can start modernizing your applications based on however you need or want. If you need any help, if you want coaching sessions, if you want anything to help guide you through it, give us a call or email me directly. terry@strata.io. I'd be more than happy to help you in any way that we can.
Awesome. Well, Chef Cozard, thank you once again for joining me in the kitchen as we tackled some of those spicy challenges and came up with a really elegant solution in the orchestration kitchen. Thank you all, our audience, for spending your valuable time with us today. We hope to see you on the next episode. And with that, have a great one. Take care.
Bon appetit.